Hey everyone, thanks for joining our Midweek podcast. My name is Andrew and I am your host, and joining me today we have Pastor Dan Sarna and Pastor Eric Goldsborough. Guys, thanks for sitting down and joining me to kind of go deeper into Sunday's message. We are in week 5 of our current series, Legendary Moses. And it was a slightly different look depending on what campus you went to, because we celebrate baptisms this Sunday at both of our campuses. Yeah. However, the numbers just, the size of the campus and the numbers of baptisms, you really experienced that this past week for the two of you. At West Lawn, we had 47 people getting baptized between two services, and at North, you guys had 10 getting baptized between two services. So, awesome, time to celebrate life change and celebrate what God is doing in people's lives. But it certainly made a slight difference in sermon prep for the two of you, looking at how do you prepare for a 30-minute sermon versus how do you prepare for a 10-minute sermon.
And it was, it wasn't just that, it was the content of this week. And so there were a lot of challenges.
I mean, you guys were just tasked with looking at the wanderings in the wilderness, which was a little over a 40-year period of Moses's life, and do that in one sermon. So I don't know where the struggle was with that. But and I rattled off just a bunch of different pointers before we got going, and we'll try and touch on as many of those today as we can. But it's a long list of things that happened in that time span. So to kick us off, though, why don't we have both of you guys kind of recap what you taught and spoke on Sunday, and then we'll dive into some deeper conversation on some of these things then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we ended last week with Hubbard talking about the parting of the Red Sea and the Israelites making it through there. And so I kind of picked up from there, but I was looking at some facts. God delivered them from probably one of the greatest escapes ever. And here they're on the other side, and it's interesting in Exodus 15, the first thing they do is Moses grabs his girl Miriam, and they write a worship song, and they worship. But within 3 days, because of lack of water, the water was bitter, they're grumbling. Which is just mind-blowing. But, I always try and think of myself, and I'm like, man, we've done the same thing. And another interesting fact is, in Deuteronomy, it tells us that their trip to the promised land should have taken 11 days. 11 days. That's what Deuteronomy tells us. And it ends up taking 40 years of a lot of pain because of grumbling and disobedience. And so with all that, I really had three lessons from this. And, I actually gave an apology. There's so many more. There's just so many spiritual lessons to be had in these books. But I chose 3. And the 3 I chose was, the first one is, a test often follows a triumph. Speaking of, they made it through. There was a triumph. They made it through the Red Sea. And now there's a test, which they failed miserably. Then the second one was, choose gratitude over grumbling. And it was interesting how many times they grumbled against the Lord. It was 15 times. 15 times they complained. And then in Numbers, we see what happens after the 15th time. My third lesson was, move forward in faith, not backwards in fear. Because it seems like fear would grip them, and then they would move backwards, and we see how they just circled in the desert for 40 years. And, again, kind of paralleling that to our life, when we face a fear, we have a tendency to kind of stop and go backwards. And in order to trust the Lord, we got to move forward. So those were my 3 lessons up at North.
Dan, talk to us about West Lawn.
Yeah. So yeah, with the amount of people that were being baptized, I wanted to have content in front of me, for ability to flow and see how time could be used. But I'm not known to be a short-winded person ever. And so even with the
Few
limited
preachers are.
things I had in front of me,
Few preachers are.
yeah. So my three things that I was looking at in terms of looking back, because again, Red Sea crossing was a defining moment, like that event itself, even more so than the plagues of Egypt. The event of crossing the Red Sea is just referred back to so many times, and this is really a defining moment, a definitive change, and really a birth of the people of God, or a rebirth, if you will, because of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then after 400 years. So I was looking back at that and really focusing on three things: that being found by God. Israel didn't find him. He knew them. He heard their cry. He found them where they were. He freed them. And so that freeing act is bringing them through the Red Sea into dry ground, on dry ground. And then on the other side of that, he forms them. And looking at the idea of like, how great is it if you're freed that you immediately get taken to the place that God's leading you, but it's not. They're in a wilderness, 3 days. They're walking and they can't find water. And maybe they had water with them, but they ran out of it.
Yep.
And they can't find anything else to refill their canisters. And then the only water they find is bitter. And immediately it turns like you just saw God do things that we only wish we could see, and anyway, but really that wilderness place that it says it at the end of chapter 15, that the Lord was testing them, and in a good way, in a way that's for our good. Like, are you going to trust me or not? So looking at the wilderness as being that place of formation and trying to connect that to what Paul says to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 10, fits way of looking at that. He's saying, look, referring back to some of these events that we looked at, the water from the rock, or the manna and the quail, the baptism of, he says he equates the Red Sea crossing as a baptism into Moses. And not that that's really what they thought it to be, but he's just trying to make that connection with Christian baptism. That he says these things, we have these things to be examples for us. And this is written down for our instruction so that we don't make the same mistakes they did. And so it's a very peculiar, thing to come across in helping us sort out how do we handle the Old Testament scriptures. And what's funny to me is that, not necessarily funny, but what shakes me a little bit is that Paul has an expectation that this Gentile church is going to be well-versed with these stories. This was the Hebrew scriptures, and the Christian movement was still very new, but his expectation was, that they would know that. And really, that was still the scriptures that they had. The New Testament canon wasn't fully formed yet. They had letters that circulated, and that letter to the Corinthians being one of them that gets added into our scriptures. But what they had was the Old Testament, and he expected that they knew these stories, were well-versed in them, so that he could refer back to them and say, this is written as examples for us and for our instruction. And so let's learn the lesson by their example and not have to live through it and test the Lord, because that's what Moses ends up getting to. So, what things I didn't have time to really get into is seeing that theme of the wilderness being that place of formation. And that usually it's the Spirit leading them. The cloud was above the people, leading them across the Red Sea to a wilderness. Jesus, after his baptism, the scripture says he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. Yep. It's the Spirit's leading, but for the purpose of teaching you to triumph, right? And Jesus is the one that does it the best, and shows us that he is the only one that can fulfill it. but that doesn't mean that we don't have to still walk in obedience to his commands. But anyway, so there was lots. I had a whole bunch of things, examples from Romans, as well, looking at that piece too, because we can feel like, oh yeah, we're failures, but, and we do fail, like Eric said already, like, and I think I even made the point, like, man, they saw all these great things and already they're grumbling, but you know what? We do the same exact thing.
So here's a thought. I heard a sermon right after this past week, and it just made me think. What do you think it is possible? I'm just throwing a curveball in there and being that guy. Is it possible that the Israelites, in a sense, started to take the Lord advantage of him, thinking we grumble, we're going to get our way. So think of this, like your kids, right? They want something, they're going to let you know, right? And they're going to let you know, and they're going to let you know, and they're going to do everything they can till you give in. And if you give in, then and they know next time, oh, it was the grumbling, or they think it was the grumbling that got mom and dad to give in. Because I'm like, they just kept doing it.
Yeah.
And it was just like, what in the world?
Yeah.
So could have they kind of gotten used or into this pattern of, oh, if we grumble enough or do this, then just a thought.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Maybe.
But we see that it does finally, that judgment comes.
Yeah.
Judgment comes, and it's pretty tough, man.
Well, and you would think that when they see some of that harsh judgment, that would serve as a lesson to them, because even with that, in my Bible, I have it like bracketed out to highlight this, where they're grumbling for water. It's been 3 days. If they would have just held on a little bit more, they were not far away from hitting an oasis. And it's interesting that the details of there say it was 12 springs and 70 palm trees. So there's water and there's shade, and those two numbers, biblically speaking, represent like government, which is interesting that now they're in the wilderness, they're receiving God's law, but like 70, that becomes the number of elders, that also represents the number of nations.
That's right.
And 12 is the, number of the tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles, all that kind of stuff. But that number 12 represents, perfect government, and that's really what God's forming in them out there as well. But it was right there. The provision was, if you just would have held on just a little bit longer, I was leading you to the place that was an oasis in the middle of the desert, So it's like that provision's often there. If we just persevere a little bit longer,
Doubt creeps in, and then we panic.
Yeah.
And then I often wonder in my own life, how many times have I missed the blessing because of my impatience or my grumbling?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we got to try to always remember that God sees way ahead. His plan is not our plan. His ways are not our ways. And he asked for faith,
Right.
And in the New Testament, the only time Jesus could not perform a miracle, which is mind-blowing in itself to even think about that, was because of their lack of faith.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. I mean, he takes faith very, very serious. We can see it here.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's just kind of, before we start moving through, obviously, there's a lot to cover in this text. Is there, if you guys had more time on Sunday, are there some key things that you wish you could have spent more time diving deeper in, before we kind of, potentially go off the rails in a deep dive of a big chunk of the Bible?
Well, for me, even looking at the giving of the law, so that's a big thing there. And there, again, the people are beholding something powerful in that. And as Moses is on the mountain, the people begin to find ways of worshiping something that, they shouldn't. They make a golden calf. And it's interesting to me that Aaron wasn't judged. So, Dan Marcel and I were talking about this last week, of perhaps, and we have to say perhaps because we don't know, it's speculation, but we see that 3,000 people were killed, put to the sword because of their, revelry. And there's, definitely a, in the language, the Hebrew language there, and perhaps even in the Greek language, would point to the same thing, that there's something of a sexual nature that began to break out as well in their dancing and revelry, because Paul makes that connection in 1 Corinthians 10, and then it's a similar word that's used when Isaac and Rebekah were seen by this king, that they had lied and said that, Rebekah was his sister, and then they're like being playful with one another, but that's like denoting like of sexual nature. So this guy realizes, wait a minute, he lied to me. That's not his sister. So it's like the same word. So something breaks out here in there, worshiping of this idol, all this kind of stuff. And, but for Aaron, he doesn't get judged in that, and he still serves as the high priest,
Yeah. Well, even
that perhaps for him, he was just, oh, you guys think you want this? All right, here you go. It's revealing already what's in their hearts to do, because it seems strange that he wouldn't have been judged, because he even lies. Like he says to Moses, no, I just took the gold and out popped this calf. What an idiot.
Not true.
Well, but he kind of leads it too, which is also interesting because, it says, so this is in Exodus 32. And now in Exodus 20, Moses goes up on top of Mount Sinai. God reveals himself to him and gives him the 10 commandments. And now you get to 32, and it says, the people saw that Moses was taking so long to come back down. They gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.
Yeah.
So Aaron said, all right, take off your gold. Take it all off, throw it in the fire, bring it to me, melt it down, and they make this calf.
He says he fashioned it, he formed it.
Yeah. So he
breaking
was
the first and second commandment, right?
He was pretty integral. In the encouraging it and not even trying to, guys, calm down.
Right.
Let's take a deep breath here.
Yeah, and it's the impatience again that we see. That's where it started. Where is he?
Yeah.
What's okay? We're just going to take matter into our own hand. That's like the lesson I get. The simple lesson I get is, man, we are to be patient with God, and when we don't, when we get in front of Him, I know when I get in front of Him, nothing good ever happens. And here we see it, but that is surprising that Aaron's like leading the charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to then go around and he goes, he lies to Moses, and out of that, he kind of walks away, oh,
Yeah.
I got by with that one.
Yeah. Well, but because here's what's crazy, because his own sons
I was just going to say
survive.
In Leviticus,
they offer, unauthorized fire.
Yeah, that's right.
And God strikes them dead.
Yeah.
And Aaron's still alive,
Yeah.
So there maybe, and it probably would have been worth me looking into a little bit in commentaries or whatever to see if there's anything there, but it seems like a probable thought that, Aaron, that's his way of, because, we see Moses has an anger issue. He comes down and sees the revelry, and he takes these things that God, it says that the finger of God wrote.
Imagine that.
Imagine having something in your hands that the finger of God, and he breaks it, shatters it. in his anger. After just telling God, hey, don't be angry with the people. don't wipe them out, Lord. And then he goes down. He's like, you idiots.
Unbelievable.
What do you think the significance
man.
of, so he breaks it
Yeah.
and grounds it to a powder,
Put it in the
scatters it
water
in
and
the
made 'em
water,
drink
and
it.
makes the Israelites drink it.
Yeah. Now that, to me, that's either, listen, I remember having this thought. That,
It's like the soap in the mouth.
I was just
yeah,
thinking of that.
yeah.
I was just
Like-
getting triggered right there by Dove soap. My parents never used the stuff with deodorant. It was just a plain Dove soap. Sorry, Mom. You did that
man.
to us.
One time I choked on soap. My mom did dish soap.
Oh, man.
And I started coughing out bubbles. And her and my brothers are laughing at me. It was funny. And I was so angry. I think I said more bad words. Needed more soap after that one.
Wow, dish soap.
man.
That's next level right there. Oh, my goodness.
Man. Anyway, how did we get there? Yeah, totally.
It's yeah. And Aaron's response: you know how prone these people are to evil. What do you want me to do, Moses? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, totally.
Aaron's being that guy.
yeah.
Throw you under the bus and then back over you.
Right. Yeah, and you wonder if that's just Moses' way of dealing with them. Is that like just his human judgment in doing that, or significance in any other way? But
And
good
it's almost and it's also almost a testing point for the Levites, it seems, as well.
right. Are they devoted to God?
Yeah, commanding the Levites to basically take up swords against
Yeah.
their own.
Mm-hmm.
Constant. I mean, is there? Gosh, we could do.
I mean,
a whole
they did
podcast
ask
on this.
Aaron. The people did ask Aaron, "Make us gods
Yeah,
who shall go before us." So in his doing it again, is he like
I think they would have killed him.
giving them what they want?
Yeah.
Right. So
I think, yeah.
because there has to be something there that God doesn't have him put to death as well,
Yeah.
like as this is happening.
yeah, but like that's just just self-preservation. That's not a way to
Yeah.
protect. Like
Yeah.
that's he wouldn't be the first person who, like, in their own self-interest, then
Yeah.
Like-
well, but so he still had purposes, and God still had purposes in mind for Aaron, because God
right.
says, "I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy."
yeah,
Right. So, yeah, I mean, there could be something with that as well, and much like for David failed, but he still had to live with the consequences, and saw, I know this is about Moses, but like that thought hit me recently. Like David, after his sin with Bathsheba, the aftermath of that, what we read in his story, even though God promised him that I will build your house and I'm going to establish your throne, right? And it's the messianic promise in there. But for David, he saw nothing but his house being destroyed for the rest of his life.
Yep.
yeah,
He never got to see his house being built up.
Yeah.
He only saw his house being destroyed. And so even though he still died, man after God's own heart, and was still, well spoken of, and Israel's greatest king, all that stuff.
yeah. And Scott will focus on it a lot next week. In the same, I mean,
For
Moses and Aaron
Yeah.
do not make it to the promised land.
Nope.
Like it
Yep.
with everything,
Yep.
there's it's
Yeah. But Moses made it to the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. So that's pretty
Right.
cool.
Well, that's right. And I was talking to Scott
Yeah.
about that, because there's characters in the Bible that you get bummed out about, like Jonah. You're just like,
Yeah.
man. And then you think of Moses, like all of that blood, sweat, and tears, really, and they never made it to the promised land. But to make it to the Mount of Transfiguration, well, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But still, there, you know.
This is off tangent. I heard a theory once that at the at Transfiguration that, you know, that was a breaking of time. And so when Moses was on Mount Sinai and Elijah was on Mount Carmel and God revealed himself to him, that was the same time that, you know,
dude, that
Jesus,
sounds like Blurry Creatures content.
well, you know, it's a little blurry inspired.
Listen,
Like
hey, I'm here for it, man.
because, you know, God lives outside of time, but you have these two.
Well, and you know, Paul,
where
when he says that he went to Saudi Arabia, he more than likely went to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, as well, where he got revelation during when he talks about that. I think in Galatians. So hey, who knows? You know,
yeah, I heard that one time. I'm like,
the space-time
that's fun.
continuum.
Yeah,
man, that little crack.
If during the, you know, if
Kate and Leopold.
Wow.
it was Peter and John, which is who
Peter, James, and John.
Peter, James, and John.
Sons of
If
Thunder.
the three of them witness those moments in history, you know, that they've read about and studied, you know, God revealing the 10 Commandments and the law to Moses and talking to Elijah on the top of Mount Carmel, like talk about a real mind bender. Like,
yeah, seriously. Yeah. And what, for our listeners, Andrew and I were just referring to another like podcast where they talk about weird stuff like that, you know. It's called Blurry Creatures. So
it's a good time.
I had no idea what you were talking about.
All right, so for Eric as well.
Yeah.
Here's a little context for you. Yeah.
I'm Googling it now. No, just kidding.
Yeah. No, they look into like the weird archaeological finds, you know, giant bones and, you know.
Fun stuff too, like Bigfoot.
Yeah,
you know,
Bigfoot.
Like their first episode was examining it, like from a biblical context, how could Bigfoot be true? Like, is there
Is this like
Yeah.
Nephilim?
I was just going to say it's probably Bigfoot comes from the Nephilim.
Well, yeah, lots of connections to.
Listen,
to
the Nephilim, I could hang out there. That's it. And this podcast is taking a turn. We're done, folks.
Started in Moses, ended up with the Nephilim. Dark creatures
Well, when they
in
went
the
into the
abyss.
Promised Land, they saw the giants there.
Well, hey,
one
let's
of the things that freaked them out. The fortified walls and the giants.
let's jump there. The 12 spies. Like, so this is the moment where God decides, hey, everybody of military age, you're never going to see the Promised Land.
Yeah.
So the time has passed now, even to this point in the story.
Yeah.
You know, the 40 years that we talked about wandering, there was wandering before that, you know, but we get to Numbers and was it Numbers 13?
And it's crazy that they always bring up Egypt. We'd be better back in Egypt.
Yeah.
Like not only are you rebelling, but it's almost like this slap in the face. Like 430 years there, and really, you griped and complained there. Now you're free, and you want to bring it up again.
Yeah.
And God finally in Numbers 14, like that's it, man. He's had it.
Like so there's been so much stuff to happen to this point, and you get to this point where they're essentially on the border of the Promised Land, and Moses elects 12 spies to go in and scout it out before they go in.
Yep.
So they can,
And they actually bring stuff back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the report comes back. 10 of them are like, nope. Like we're not doing it.
10 of them see the obstacles in the field.
Yes.
That's all they see.
They talk that they are mere insects compared to the size of the people who inhabit the land.
Even though the Lord split the Red Sea, we're insects compared to these guys. They quickly forget.
And so it's Caleb and Joshua are the only ones who are who remember their previous experiences, it seems, and understand the fact that God himself is with you and leading the charge, and as long as you follow him, you'll be successful.
Yeah.
And so, the spies come back, and
I love what Caleb says. You got the 10 grumblers, right, facing their fear
Yeah.
and seeing those. But Caleb says, and this is in Numbers 14:6, he's like, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into a land that is flowing with milk and honey. He's got the right attitude. And he goes on to say, only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. So what happens next? Verse 10. Here we go. But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. They want to kill them.
Yeah.
For having faith, they want to kill them.
Yeah.
And then you keep going, and the Lord is like, that is it. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to take out this whole generation. This generation will not walk into that promised land.
Yeah.
Now, you can be like, boy, that's kind of hard. Is it harsh after all the mercy and grace that God bestowed upon them?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, and this is like where it comes to like the big, like meta-narrative stuff of the rebellion that happens in Genesis 11 at Babel is where now God is saying, okay, I'm dividing the nations, confuses languages, but now he's starting and making for himself one people. And through that one people, it's to bring all people back to himself. But it's starting with that, a son, right? And this then echoes back to the seed promise in Genesis 3. All right, so astute Bible readers, we want to follow those things, throughout the story to see, okay, is this the one? Is this, this righteous figure that's going to rise up and crush the head of the serpent and all that kind of stuff, right? And so here they are, and part of that rebellion too is that we saw this whole thing with, we already talked about Nephilim, so it's going there, the sons of God and the daughters of men, and these great men of renown, giants of old, all that kind of stuff. There becomes this, it was something, it was a stench to God, and there's something bad about that. And they see giants in the land. Well, hey, where else did we hear about stuff like that, And they're driving them out. And so they have that task. They have to rid the land of this. You're going to possess the land, but you have to cleanse it of that which doesn't belong. And again, it's not all the peoples. There's just certain groups, right, that have to be those descendants. And I think it really is a bloodline issue. And we see this the people that are the people of promise, and then so the seed, the good seed and the bad seed. It's either the seed of the woman or the seed of the serpent. And I think that's really a big part of what's going on here in this historical part of Israel's life. Yet they don't want to do it because God gives them their law to be stewards of it, right? But they are just as infected with the sin problem as any other people. So they have God's law, which now reveals your sinfulness, but they are just as deeply cursed by it themselves, and so it's like the good side and the bad side of the law. The one hand, we know this is how we can follow God, but we can't do it because we are wicked and depraved people, Right. And now we know how sinfulness we are. Like Paul talks about that in Romans 7. He's like, if it wasn't for the law, I wouldn't know what covetousness was. But now because it's in the law, I covet everything, and he gets to this whole point of this back and forth. And then who will deliver me from this body of death? What a wretched man I am. But thanks be to God through the Lord Jesus Christ. So again, we have this perspective post, death and resurrection of Jesus, who fulfilled all of these things. But there's still the story has to unfold, and
Right.
and there's real things happening here to establish all of that, so that at just the right time, the Son of God could come. Right.
Sorry, I'm reading about the rebellion of Quran.
Yeah, chapter 14 of Numbers is so thick and heavy, man. It's just God laying it out, you know.
Yeah, I mean, from everything that gets kicked off from the spies returning and that report, you know, it. Whew.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not, and God warns them, you know, because
Yeah.
you have turned away from the Lord, he will not be with you and you will fall by the sword, you know. Nevertheless, and it's interesting, you see that word a lot. Nevertheless, it's like, even though I warned you, even though I'm telling you what's going to happen, nevertheless, that sinful nature takes over, and they just do what they want to do.
Yeah.
You know, they don't heed that warning. Nevertheless, in their presumption, they went up towards the highest point in the high country, though neither Moses nor the Ark of the Covenant moved from the camp. They're just like, man, you guys are glutton for punishment.
Wow. There's too much, guys. There's too much to get into.
Well,
there's lots of things that echo that become themes for us, man. Like I'm looking, Numbers 14, verse 20. Then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. You know, Moses is asking for, for a pardon of the people, he's interceding for them yet again. So God says, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Does that sound familiar to anybody else?
Yeah. And
this is the problem. That's what God wants to do.
Nevertheless.
Nevertheless. Yeah. Yeah. Nevertheless. That's something that we're looking for. But he says that none of these men that have seen his glory and saw his signs that he did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not obeyed my voice. So big things, we don't want to put God to the test. Back to like the children parent thing. I'd say that with my kids all, don't test me. Like, don't see if I'm going to follow through.
But they do.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You little Israelites.
yeah, totally. There we go. That's the new phrase.
They'll look at you like.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But it's
God's desire, even that he wants to fill the whole world with his glory. And that's echoed in Habakkuk. That said, that's I can't remember the other prophet that uses that same line. And this is a theme that God is going to fill the earth with his glory as the waters cover the seas. And there it is. It's all like it's all within the Old Testament. Like anything in the New Testament and stuff like that, like even fulfilled promises already or things that are yet to be fulfilled. It's all throughout God's word. It's not like we can't divorce the two, testaments from each other. They're such an integrated work, but it's amazing. And that's where God says that, like where these people are about to and supposed to be taking possession of the land of promise. And they've seen his glory, and man, we want to see his glory. And it's just a cool promise right there. I love that.
But before we wrap, I want to jump to Numbers 21 and look at the bronze snake. And I don't remember, Dan, if this was before we started recording or not, but like the history and future, like what the bronze snake turns into. But I think it's, again, it comes about because the Israelites are complaining.
Yep.
Why have you let us out from Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread, no water, and we just have this wretched food. And so the Lord sent poisonous snakes among them to bite them, and many Israelites died. And it took them realizing this is happening because we were complaining again, to then turn and go to Moses, please intercede for us. And so the Lord instructs Moses to make a snake image and mount it on a pole. When anyone who's bitten looks at it, he will recover. So Moses made this bronze snake and mounted it on a pole. Whenever anyone was bitten,
Moses
he looked
is
at
pretty
it,
handy.
and the bronze snake, he recovered. And I think it's this is something that Moses creates at the instruction of God. It's used as a tool, but and again, I don't remember if this was before we started recording or after. And,
it was. It was before we started recording.
The bronze snake turns into an idol.
Yes.
And like it
is King Hezekiah. I checked.
Warning of even things that God creates and makes for us to help us, we can twist and manipulate and turn into idols.
Yes.
And like, what are we doing in our own lives today where we're taking something that is meant for good and meant to remind us of God's greatness, and we put more focus on that and worship that versus what it represents.
Well, we see it all the time. God. We worship the creation and not the creator.
Yeah.
I mean, crystals and astrology, just all of that is idols that we put before God, and we're missing the creator of all things. We're still doing it, probably even to a greater degree. Yeah.
Right. Well, and so people, it's in 2 Kings 18, and you see that the people start worshiping, the bronze serpent that they kept as a relic of, God's faithfulness to his people. But King Hezekiah has to destroy it because the people are worshiping it as a god instead of the true God. But then Jesus refers to the bronze snake and the pole to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, that just as Moses lifted up the serpent and people looked to it and were healed, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, right? And he's equating that with himself. It's really cool. But what are some of those things that we might do? Paul, in 1 Corinthians 10, he's saying to them, these people that are Gentiles, they've experienced the power of God, they have some wild charismatic services, in Corinth. And you can read all about that there. But there's some questions. Paul's responding to a letter that they sent him with some questions. And we pick up on that through the way that he's responding to it and referring to that. And it seems that there's some people that think that they're above falling because we have the new covenant, because we have baptism into Christ, because we have the Lord's Supper. They want to know how close they can get to the line or even cross the line and it not be a big deal.
Yeah.
Because they think they're above it, right? Like there's like a haughtiness there. And so he expounds on, and he's bringing up these stories from Israel's life under Moses' leadership, God feeding them, with bread from heaven, God bringing forth water from the rock. There's even an allusion. Paul even blends some stories together, some details, and I think that's just to be all encompassing. I don't think he's misquoting necessarily. I think he's just trying to lump together as much as he can to make the point that he's trying to make, to say you think that you can, go and hang out at these idol temples, where it's probable that there were some, again, sexual sins going on, like orgies and things like that these people are still participating in, claiming their Christianity, and being at, Christian gatherings, all this kind of stuff, but still hanging out with their old, buddies and going to the old places. And Paul is saying, look at Israel. look at what they did. Look at how they put God to the test. They had their own form of baptism. They all crossed through the Red Sea with the cloud of God above them and through the water on dry ground. They all drank from the rock. They all ate from the bread of heaven. Yet God was not pleased with all of them. And many of them fell in the wilderness. And he says, now we have these to be examples for us. We have these to be our instruction. And he brings it back to flee from idolatry.
Yep.
And flee from sexual immorality. And that's what it comes down to. It's like those two things are always together. And as a biblical motif, even when it comes to devotion to God or going after other gods, idolatry and adultery are together. Because when you worship another god, it's like being adulterous in your relationship to God with another. Yeah. And, as well as there seems to be some, like gratifying the lusts of the flesh. And what better example than in sexuality, which, hey, for all of time, that has seemed to be an issue, because look at all of the sexual confusion that we see today, the sexualization of everything. Like, it's just wild. And that's before, and Paul is saying that to flee from it. Use all these things as a warning sign to get the heck away from adultery and idolatry, Don't let anything become a stumbling block, really. And I guess we can do that. You use a good example, Andrew, of like, okay, so God provides this way for the people to be healed, and then they end up perverting that by worshiping it. Do we do the same thing? Like if we were to just examine what might it look like in our circles here?
Well, I think we could. I mean, there's a whole nother podcast, but just look at churches in general in America. What has crept into some churches in America? It ain't about Jesus anymore.
Yeah,
it's about meology, ideology.
Yeah.
It's not about Jesus anymore.
Yeah,
and I mean we see it. Same thing was happening in Corinth, that they couldn't even do the sacraments correctly.
Right. Yes.
You know what I mean? He had to correct them on that.
Yeah.
So we still see it, but that's very true, man. Idolatry.
Right. Yeah. And Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians 10 is that it's not gods, lowercase g gods. It's actually demons.
Yeah.
And you don't want to open yourself up to that. Yeah. So he's not saying that there aren't, like, yes, anything, other cultures would give it names, whether it be Zeus or Aphrodite or whatever. Mm-hmm. They're not real characters, but as they're worshipped, it's actually demons that are manifested within that. And that's problematic.
Man, we just gave
Eric's losing it over here.
I'm dropping everything. That could set you up for a lot of different podcasts right there. Some of that, but
we are out of time though.
No way.
Yeah,
I feel like we just got started.
Any last quick final thoughts before we do wrap up today?
I just encourage people to stay strong in this story. We've covered a lot of ground with Moses, and there's still some to go. So, I mean, I know you're going to talk about week 6 here, but this is going to be phenomenal, Scott ending it. So keep following with, man, and don't just read it, study it, and look at the parallels with Old Testament and New Testament, because there's a lot. I was I referred to Hebrews 11 talking about faith, where it goes back to referring a lot about Moses. So it's when you start to study it, man, it's pretty mind blowing.
For sure.
Dan, anything before we wrap?
No.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff, but
I think I've said plenty.
You don't think you can
I've said enough.
No, if you guys missed Sunday's messages at Westlawn or North, you can always go back and catch them. You can either watch the services on our website at gtchurch.online or on our YouTube channel, or listen to the sermons in podcast form wherever podcasts are available. And if you enjoy this podcast, make sure you share it with others. as well. Coming up this Sunday, we have the last week in our Legendary Moses series. Eric already mentioned Pastor Scott will be preaching to both campuses, looking at, Moses's legacy and everything that happens at the end of Moses's life. And then after that, we have Palm Sunday, Easter Sunday, and a Breakthrough Sunday that I know Scott is excited about as well.
Yeah.
So make sure you stay connected with everything that's going on here. But until then, I hope that today's conversation has had an impact on your life as we all continue to grow together in Christ. Take care and God bless.